Okay, I'm going to be going over my infographic. To start off, we're going to go with visual potential and encoding. Appearance is a form of visual potential, shows the viewer what something looks like. Through the use of recognizable graphic elements, it can show the user what the topic is about. For my appearance element, I decided to show the viewers the graphic of controllers for the virtual reality devices that my infographic is about. On the left, you will see the controller for the Oculus Rift, and on the right is the controller that corresponds with HTC Vive. The use of these graphics allows the educated viewer at a glance to know that the infographic is about virtual reality devices, or viewers unfamiliar with the devices to at least know that it is about something in the realm of video game controllers. Although these VR devices can be used for much more than video games, it's still a good thing for random viewers to associate with the graphic, since it's a main use for the device, and since one of my other elements focuses on the video games and experiences available for each device. In order to follow my visual language model, I stuck to only fills, which makes some of the characteristics of the controllers difficult to isolate. One solution I found for this issue was to use different colors of my color model. I used 3 different shades of blue, which almost did the trick. However, to show that the top circle of the Oculus Rift was a joystick, I needed to add a color to show separation between the controller and the top of the joystick. I used a shade of gray that was not in my color model, but a darker tone. I felt that this was necessary because it uses the same gray, because if I use the same gray as the background, viewers might think that it was a see-through hole or something like that. I also had to show that the light sensor, which is used to know if the thumb is on the controller or lifted off of it, was not just a button, so I repeated the use of this gray. The use of these infographics shows the differences in what the controllers look like, as well as hints that they might have different feels, because one looks more like a TV remote in design and the other looks more ergonomic, such as a modern controller console, or a modern console controller. To follow my visual language model again, I added another appearance element. I felt that this was needed in the middle because it would kind of help fill in the space between the controllers. I decided to do this later on in my design process. This element has minimum detail and is mostly just outlines, with the only fills being at the top, like in my model. This graphic shows a person using a virtual reality headset, which can help inform the viewer that this infographic is not only about VR controllers, but about the virtual reality devices as a whole. Relationship as a form of visual potential shows the links between 2 or more concepts. These links can be exploited through lines or diagrams. For my element, I used a Venn diagram with accompanying lines. My diagram shows the 3 regions of popular HTC Vive only games, Oculus Rift only games, as well as the games that can be played on both consoles. I used the same color encodings of my Vive being the light blue and the Rift being the dark blue. This isn't the strongest use of it in this element, because in order to make the Venn diagram, I had to lower the opacity on both of the circles, making them almost look the same color, especially when I switched to the dark background color from the gray in order to adapt to my layout and color models. I followed the left and right alignments that can be found in my typography model, as well as the same lines and anchors that it uses. Time as a form of visual potential shows the visualization of when elements happen relevant to each other. For my element, I decided to show the major events within the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift life cycles on the same timeline. I believe that this helps the viewer see that one had a more grassroots upbringing, while one was manufactured after in pursuit of the market. Neither of my models had a timeline, so I created this one using the circular shapes found in all my models. Because time is a continuum, I decided to have arrows on both sides of my timeline, showing that there is time in both sides. There's a past and a future. One thing that I wasn't proud of doing was the spacing of the events. I wanted to place the years so that they were accurately spaced, such as the gap from 2009 to 2012 would be a bigger gap than the gap from 2012 to 2013. However, because most of my events happened later on, I thought that it was necessary to just give them equal spacing. That way it added more symmetry to the element. I initially used left align from my typography model, but it made it seem like most of the Vive events were only on the right and there was a big gap in the top left of this element. So instead I used the center alignment found throughout my layout model and visual language model to make it more visually appealing. Numbers as a form of visual potential shows the viewer a message using a particular set of data through effective encoding strategies. Here I use a bar graph as modeled in my visual language model. This information represents the cost of each device and shows that the Rift is currently selling at 2/3 the price of the HTC Vive. I use the same color encodings as done in previous elements to differentiate the two bars, so it's easy to tell which bar corresponds to which device without even looking at the x-axis. I further emulated my model by using the same squiggly line for the x-axis. Here's another numbers element I created, which shows the data of the sales for the devices through 3 quarters of last year. This was all the data I could find, due to them not being released until late 2016, and the quarterly earnings always being released to the public at later dates. It shows that the Vive started off the year being the most popular, but then the Rift became the most popular seller later on in the second quarter. And then in the third quarter, things started to even out. I decided to use months to represent the quarters because it makes it easier for people to read that are unfamiliar with quarterly earnings reports, such as those that don't know much about market research. I used the amount of the area taken up by the pie charts to show the data related to the sales of that quarter. The bigger the area, the more sales for that device relative to the other device. This is also known as market share. I listed in the subheader shipments first, then market share, which goes with the number of sales being shown above the percentage of the market share in the sections of the pie charts. I further used 2 shades of blue for the encodings, which go with each device. Location as a form of visual potential communicates positions of things or places relevant to each other in the world. In my element, I displayed the location of the 2 headquarters for the companies producing the devices. I wanted to convey to the users that both headquarters are within the United States and subside on the west coast of the country. To do this, in the small amount of region that allotted to me by the layout model, I separated them out into 2 different maps as used and then used the color encodings and placement below the controller so that the viewer could infer which map goes to which device. I used the fill of the maps in my layout model. However, that one used gradients, and because I only have 1 data point in each map, it just looks like it's completely filled. This is good though, because I didn't use any borders and they didn't use any borders in the layout model. This is my layout. It models my layout model very well. I pretty much matched each element to a corresponding element within it. I also like that there's a lot of symmetry between them. I believe that it's a great blend of my layout model as well as my color model, so that way you kind of have a separation in the middle with the different color, which also makes it so it separates the elements. Now we're going to go into color. This did not get copied very well, but this is my color model. As mentioned previously, color is constantly used for encoding throughout my infographic. It shows what data is relevant to what device. I chose the blue color model because blue is the main color associated with each device. And I'll show you that right here. With associations, I used the blue color model, and the blue is mainly associated with the HTC Vive logo, and that would be the light blue. However, the Oculus at one point did have a dark blue in their logo, and then they switched to this gray logo, gray/black logo, but the darker blue can still be associated with Facebook, which is its parent company. Blue also is universally associated with innovation within the technology industry, which is the tone that I want to convey within my design. All the colors I used in my color model fall within the same quadrant of the hue color selection wheel. This shows that there's harmony between them and they complement each other well. Now I'm going into typography. I tried to use the exact same fonts for each of them. I spent quite a bit of time looking through them. As you can see with my top title, it has very pointy edges to it, as well as it's kind of a bolder font. And so for that I used the Cervec font type. And then kind of in the subheaders I used PT Sans Narrow to give it kind of a narrowish font where the letters are a little bit squished together. And then for my main text, I just use Helvetica. I use identity labels as well as precision labels throughout my design to identify the data and what it relates to. On the left you can see some access labels, and then on the right you can see some identity labels. I use some annotations that are the same as my visual language model, so they have the pointers coming out of them, and then it's the same font type of Helvetica. With visual hierarchy, it goes in relation to size and importance. So in the middle I have this bigger devices, the device elements, and those show that that's kind of the main focus of it, as well as it allows a reader to instantly know what the infographic is about. And then because I thought the other elements should be about the equal size, everything else tries to be equal. You'll notice there's a lot of symmetry, so the top left element and the top right element are going to be the same size. The bottom left element and the bottom right element are going to be the same size. I believe that the location was not that important because it only had one data point for each device, so I tried to put that in the smallest part of my visual layout. Going into unity and variety, I used a lot of circles in my piece, and because of that I tried to space them out so that way there was variety in them and they weren't all aligned on the same side. So you'll notice that in the top left there's circles, but then the other circles are going to be the top right of the controller, and then the bottom right where it's mainly an element that focuses around circles. As well as when I use lines such as the timeline or the cost of the device, I put those in the opposing corners as well. Because I use repetition of the lines and repetition of the circles, I believe that gives it unity, but because I spaced them out, it gives it variety. When it came to alignment, I spent a lot of time perfecting alignment of my graphic. This is kind of an earlier version where you can see my work with the guide tools, and this isn't quite all the guides I use because I kept moving them around and replacing them. But I did try to make it so that way things were centered. The only thing that wasn't centered when it came to my final product was the guy with the headset in the middle, and that was because the Oculus controller is not as big in terms of height, and so then when I stretched out to try and make it the same size as the Vive, it became a lot wider, and I played around a lot with trying to space them equally in the center to give them just as much importance, and I finally got to a point where they were kind of equally in the center and the labels were equally in the center as well. However, I had that space in the middle, so when I came to placing in the graphic of the guy with the headset, it became a little off-center to the left, but I still made sure that he was being covered by both controllers, so that way it looked a little bit more center for him to be there. If you look on the very far right, you can see that guideline, and that's kind of a use where I try to make it so things were lined up, but it's something that the viewer might not necessarily notice. So if you look at the top line that goes horizontally, the end of it is going to hit that guideline, as well as kind of the end of the word device is going to hit the guideline. Then at the x-axis, that is going to hit the guideline. The text within the top selling VR elements is going to hit the guideline, and as well as the bottom line hits the guideline, and finally my name hits the guideline as well. Those are all very well lined up. And that's going to conclude me talking about my infographic.